have structured my presentation today in different items. So I would like to start with conservation tillage systems and terminology, in a way that we know what we are talking when we use different terms of cultivation technologies. Then I like to go into the global adoption of conservation tillage, looking at the acreage which is managed with conservation tillage so far. Then, of course, I like to share the view on benefits and yield effects of this technology in Europe, but also on a global scale. And then I will come to the impact on the energy consumption, meaning basically fuel consumption, time consumption, etc. Of course, conservation tillage has an impact on the soil, as we all know. I like to go through what it changes in terms of soil biology, the organic matter content, and also the carbon dioxide storage. At that step, I will pause for the Q&A session, and after the break, I will continue with the impact on crop available water. I also talk about what happens with weeds, pest and disease management in conservation tillage, and then I finish off with key messages. But first start to get a kind of common understanding what conservation tillage systems are and what kind of terms we use. Conventional tillage is always associated with soil inversion by a moldboard plow. That's a system which is very much in use in Ukraine and also very much used all over Europe. And the cultivation system comprises, of course, the soil tillage system first, and we talk about tillage depths of 25 to 30 centimeters with a plow normally. After that, we have a seed preparation, mainly by harrowing and packing the soil again, and then we have the seeding to establish the crop in the field. This can be done in a kind of sequential. You have all these machineries here. So we have the plow first, and the harrows, and then the planting or the seeding equipment. But there are a lot of machinery available where these operations can be combined, in particular the seed bed preparation with a power harrow and then the planting or sowing machine. Or maybe less in use is in a way a combination of all these different operations in one. So this is very much what we call a conventional tillage based on a moldboard plow right at the beginning. Conservation tillage systems in a way are differentiated between a low tillage, where we have some cultivation, either deep or shallow. A shallow tillage is 8 to 10 centimeters, a deep low tillage system 16 to 20 centimeters. And then the no tillage system, which comprises very much direct seeding without kind of tillage operations in the field. In common, they have that there is no soil inversion like with a moldboard plow. So the moldboard plow is not necessary and not used anymore in this conservation tillage system. So the tillage system normally goes with a power harrow or with a cultivator, and after that, where we have the seedbed preparation with the harrow and the seeding. Similar to the conventional tillage, this can be sequential, or it can be in a combined way that seedbed preparation and seeding is combined. or all operation are combined. Sometimes also as a strip till, that only in a way parts of the field where really the crop has to be established are tilled, what we call strip till. Or everything can be combined, so in one go, in a way you can have a kind of low tillage system. A no tillage system, in a way, is always a direct seeding system. So after, in a way, for instance, the wheat crop, the maize or whatever, even sugar beet, is planted directly into the field without any kind of tillage. So under this operation, only 1/3 of the row space seedbed prepared at a farrow depth. That's all what how the soil is moved. So the objectives of having or of using conservation tillage system is reduction of the mechanical movement of soil, a better structure and load-bearing soil. Very continuous pores means an undisturbed passage between the top soil layer and the subsoil, and that the soil is covered by harvest residues to avoid upsilting and erosion. And initially, that was the main driving factor for implementing low tillage system. It's just it's a measure against erosions firstly. So, but also by having this kind of operation, it's well known that we can increase the biological activity and also the earthworm activities. We can avoid extreme changes of temperatures at the soil surface and allow the roots kind of undisturbed root growth to deeper profiles. And normally you need less strength of machinery. So by dropping the plow, the assumption is that the energy consumption or fuel consumption can be reduced. So a lot of upsides initially, but of course in a very complex system like crop management in different soils of the world, in a way one or the other tillage systems fits more or better or less, and it depends very much on, in a way, the interactions between let's say the farm management, the soil properties, and what kind of crops are grown to decide which kind of tillage system would fit the best for the local conditions. So it's very difficult to say, in a way, based on research, on literature, what needs to be done in the field. It's more important that we look at the pros and cons of the different systems and see, in a way, what how the balance between the pros and cons is based given the local conditions, soil, weather, and the crops which needs to be produced. When people consider to invest or develop low tillage system, I think the place to go and to watch are the Great Plains in North America, where this system has been developed the most over the last, I would say, 3-4 decades, and where we have similar conditions compared to what is observed in East Europe and maybe also particularly in Ukraine. So this is just a direct seeding no-till operation. Wheat crop or cereal crop has been there as a previous crop. And we have these big machines, the planting machines with a tank for the seeds. and sometimes even also fertilizer. And the planting is done in one go in kind of very wide machines. And then the crop, like in this case, the soybean, established quite neatly in between the stubble and the crop residues. So I think how it worked there is very important, and to see how it worked there is very important, really, to evaluate whether this kind of technology is appropriate for the conditions you work on. As I have mentioned, the global adoption of conservation tillage systems is quite widespread, but the majority of conservation agriculture we will find in the Americas. So and these are figures from 2013. Bear with me, I haven't seen any kind of new statistics, but by and large, I think they still apply for today. Not too many changes recently. So the area under conservation agriculture in Americas are in the order of magnitude of 50 to, I would say, 70 million hectares of land. And this comprises more than almost 76% of the total area in the world cropped by conservation agriculture, meaning low or no-till. And the percent of cropland which is cultivated with no-till in South America is mainly, then we talk about Brazil, Argentina, these countries with big acreages, rain-fed agriculture. So 60% there is cropped by conservation agriculture. North America is far less, only 24%. Probably today has increased towards probably 30%, so it's still increasing in North America. But still there, they use a lot of, in a lot of areas, they have still the ploughing in place. Australia, New Zealand also play a big role. In total, about 20 million tons, approximately 20 million tons of conservation agriculture. In the order of magnitude of 35 to 40% of the total cropland is cultivated with slow till or no till. And then we have the other continents left very much behind for a couple of reasons. So compared to what we have in Americas and the Australias, Asia, Europe, and Africa acreages on conservation agriculture are quite marginal. We talk about somehow between 1 and maybe 5% in total of the percent of the cropland, which is either low or no tillage. The figure for Ukraine I found is about 700,000 hectares, probably close to 1 million today, given the land bank you have in Ukraine. That's also a very kind of small part of the total cropland you manage in Ukraine. In Europe, and northwestern Europe or in Western Europe, acreage are quite small, and there was hardly any development in most countries. For instance, in France, Germany, between 2008 and 2009, between 2008, 2009 and 2013, there was hardly any significant increase. We see an increase in areas where we under drier conditions. As we all know, Spain used to have 650,000 hectares. Now they are probably close to 1 million hectares. it, in a way, gives a kind of hint that conservation agriculture probably plays a bigger role in areas, in drier areas, compared to, let's say, a very wet Finland, Germany in the northern part at least, and also France. There's very little growth. United Kingdom has grown a bit, but of course the acreage given the land bank is quite modest. However, there is a kind of steady increase between 2008 and 2009. The total acreage in Europe has increased by 30%, and it increases further slowly. That has also to do with the availability of the machinery, which is required for conservation agriculture. A lot of developments are ongoing, and I think the machinery for this type of cultivation become more mature these days. When we look at the history and the global uptake of conservation agriculture in million hectares, basically it has started in the 80s. Before there were hardly any cultivation agriculture, and was a kind of exponential growth first until probably to now, and it seems to level off a bit these days. So the increase becomes smaller. And this steep increase is very much driven by the change we have observed in the Americas, and partly also in Australia, New Zealand. So it doesn't come from, let's say, the increase in acreage in Europe. So there are probably a couple of reasons why farmers adopt to conservation agriculture. And of course, when growers change their operations, they do it normally for very good reasons. But as I have mentioned before, one main driving factor to look into conservation tillage was the observation that with this conventional tillage, there were some problems with wind and water erosion of the soil. So the soil protection against it and no tillage is definitely a measure against erosion, was one major driving force for adoption. But of course, so in a way, maintaining soil fertility is very important, but in the short to medium term, of course, it has to serve the farm economy. So also reduction of cost in machinery and fuel, and also reduction of labor cost, less labor, less hours was one reason to look at it. Yield increases and greater yield stability has been observed in some areas, and I will come to the yield responses in the next couple of slides. Greater nutrient use efficiency has been also observed. This is very much driven by more microbial or biological activity in the soil. Better water use efficiency in dryland areas has been a benefit, and of course, as a prerequisite, it was very much a development and the availability of technical solutions for sowing, fertilizer application, and weed control for conservation agriculture. When we look at the experiences with conservation agriculture and research, it's always, or it's quite difficult to give, in a way, the different results the right weight, because as you know, when you change soil tillage, it takes the time before the soil gets into a kind of new equilibrium. And when we have short-term comparison between conventional and low tillage, thus quite often does not reflect the impact on soil fertility. So it's very important to look into kind of longer term experiences and trials, which are not too many, at least when looked into the Anglo-American literature. I'm not so sure about research in East Europe, Ukraine, Russia in particular, because unfortunately I cannot follow this kind of papers because of the language. But of course, soil degradation is something which needs to be reduced as much as possible. In a way, losing soil means losing soil fertility. And there's an estimate in Europe that soil degradation comes with a cost of about 38 billion annually. So the reduction in soil fertility costs yield and has, of course, some other impacts like, you know, dust in the air and so forth. No, one reason why conservation agriculture hasn't been adopted too much in Europe could be that there are, of course, objections like, in a way, weed control becomes more challenging. We talk quite often about the increase of herbicide use. So this might even offset the benefits of fuel saving. There are some problems with slug. So they, like, of course, the residues on top of the soil can propagate better and so on. And I think one important reason is that the crop rotations in Europe, in Western Europe in particular, are very much dominated by cereals and oilseed rape. And there are not too many broadleaf crops in the rotation, like sugar beet, soybean, like sunflower also in those rotations of up today. So, and this kind of crops are very important to be successful in a no tillage system, because they contribute, of course, to a lot of benefits which come from conservation agriculture. But let's have a look into the yield effects of the tillage intensity on yield. And this is a review paper published in 2010, where about 562 trials have been evaluated. And it's the bars indicate the relative yield to conventional tillage in percentage. So conventional tillage is very much the 100% line. So if bars are below the 100% line, anyway, there was a kind of yield penalty towards reduced tillage. If they're above, which was not the case in this study, then of course the change to conservation agriculture came with a yield penalty. Anyway, they have this differentiated or distinguished trials in no tillage, the green bars, and reduced tillage. No tillage means direct seeding. Reduced tillage means either deep or shallow tillage. And what we can see that if we have a crop rotation with leafy crops, broadleaf crops, then with the reduced tillage, the yield was almost the same as with conventional tillage, plow-based tillage, but with no tillage, there were quite a significant reduction by some 7 to 8%. there were rotations with only cereals, probably also maize or corn included, then the yield effect were even more pronounced. Again, reduced tillage performs always somehow better than, in a way, no tillage. And when we look at the different soil types, we see that, and that is something known, that on very sandy soils, the yield penalty with low or no tillage is quite severe. So we can have yield decreases in the order of magnitude of 12–13% with reduced tillage, and even somehow 15–17% with no tillage. Of course, the loamy clay loam soils are more suitable for low tillage for a couple of reasons. So in this respect, most of the areas seem to be quite suitable in Ukraine for this type of cultivation, but also it's not given that with reduced tillage the same yield can be achieved compared to conventional tillage. That, at least based on this study, indicates that we will lose some yield with changing from conventional to conservation tillage. When we look at the crops, so when the data are pooled in a different way, so they are pooled along the different crops. So we see the effect on silage maize, grain maize. I cannot really understand why, in a way, no tillage performed so poor in these trials on grain maize. So I would question, in a way, this very severe decrease in yield with no tillage. However, it looks like that, for instance, potato is very, very suited for low tillage. So when we look at these data, with both no tillage and reduced tillage, we get the same or even a bit higher yield. Spring cereals, the same. Surprisingly, also sugar beet, with reduced tillage, performs the same or even a bit more higher than with conventional tillage. And with winter cereals, we have also a kind of small decrease in yield compared to conventional tillage. Sugar beet, we talked about the problem with root rot. So we know that if maize is grown as a pre-crop in sugar beet, we need to have a plow in order to avoid or to reduce the root rot. But we saw also in the presentation about root rot that after wheat, for instance, sugar beet with no till, it's quite okay, and also it helps a bit reducing the root rot also. So sugar beet after winter wheat could be considered as a crop for reduced tillage, not for no tillage, obviously, because you see the yield decrease. This European trial was quite significant. This gives you a bit the European picture on yield. When we look at the global scale, there are also thousands of trials, observations with low tillage compared to conventional tillage. On this map, you see the different colors represent different crops. You see a lot of orange, although those are the crops where the trials have been done on maize. In the Americas, we see a lot of these greenish color, which represents very much the soybean trials. So you see a lot of soybean comparisons also in South America, Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay. Whereas as you know, Europe is very much dominated by trials and cereals. So you see the blue dots here, very much trials with cereals, but you see also some maize trials. The diameter of these dots represents the number of observations behind. So you can conclude based on the colors here that the majority of trials observations are done with maize, soybean, and winter cereals. You see in a way a very blank area in East Europe. Also, no data from Ukraine, unfortunately. I don't know whether there is no research, or I guess it's probably very much because it's not published in English. So of course there will be definitely good information also from studies from your area. However, similar to what I have shown for Europe, based on all these trials investigated in this meta studies, we have the relative effects of the conventional tillage compared to the no or low tillage system. And here you see the 100% line. That means values very close to the 100% line means that on average the same yield has been observed in conservation tillage or reduced tillage system compared to conventional tillage. So as quite often, if you have a big database, all the means become or get closer to the 100% line. In general, I think the majority of crops are somehow below the 100% line. It means that this is consistent to what we have seen from the European scene. So a small yield decrease with reduced tillage. Some crops are maybe a bit different. So for instance, sorghum, there was a small improvement. Sunflower also seems to be on the global scale with reduced tillage perform somehow better compared to conventional. Whereas all the others are very similar, basically either a small decrease or the same yield as with conventional tillage. A kind of maybe a pattern we will see when we look at the yield results when they are pooled by the precipitation balance, means in a way the availability of water. So in a way from left to right on the x-axis, we see in a way a system where we have a very severe water deficit towards an excess of water on the right-hand side of the x-axis. And here it looks like there is a response in yield towards higher yields with conservation agriculture cultivation when under dry conditions. Also, now we have this, if there is a water deficit of 200 millimeters in this case, even positive, and it becomes somehow more towards the negative if we have an excess of water as a total water balance. This is probably also one reason why, let's say, Northwestern Europe, we don't see so much conservation agriculture, because most areas we have, of course, excess of water there, and this seems to be in a way not the best. It seems to be not the best conditions for conservation agriculture if you have, because the soils are quite moist then in spring, and we will come to that later. And that means in a way it takes longer before they become they warm up, and also in a way it takes longer before they dry. And this might be one reason for Northwestern Europe, at least, why conservation agriculture hasn't take space so much there. But let's look at the effect in a way on the energy consumption. We saw that maybe increase in yield is maybe not the most important driving factor. So it's probably a bit more on, in a way, saving cost in conservation agriculture by dropping the, in a way, heavy load of plowing. And also there we see some statistics, trial data from different areas. Of course, when we look at plowing and the, in a way, the full consumption for plowing depend the soil texture. Now we talk about light soil, heavy soils, and that means in a way heavy soils are in a way needs more power to move them, to in a way invert them, and therefore, of course, the fuel consumption, as it is shown in the chart on the right side here, depends very much on also on the soil texture. So based on this trial data, when we compare the fuel consumption either for plowing or low or no tillage, we see that in sand we have fuel consumption of 66 liters per hectare compared for plowing, compared to 96 liters per hectare on clay soil, and as you know, the loam soil is in between. So when we reduce tillage towards low tillage, we can save some fuel. In a way, the more heavy the soil is, the higher are the savings. And of course, you can calculate what the cost savings are in terms of less fuel consumption. However, it's not only the fuel consumption, it's also the number of hours which needs to required to till the land. And the variable cost has been recorded on a piece of land like it is shown here on the left-hand side, obviously with different textures, soil textures in this field, and they have split the field in half and have now recorded the time and also the fuel, the diesel consumption continuously, so that a map of variable cost was compiled based on this recording. And you see the yellow colors means in a way low variable cost, and the dark blue colors in a way high variable cost on the spots. And on average, they concluded that in a way the variable cost to till the land in a conventional manner is about 92 euros per hectare, and with the low till reduced tillage 56 euros per hectare. So quite substantial saving. Might be a bit biased because in a way the texture was maybe not exactly the same on, let's say, both parts of the field, but it shows that in a way a kind of significant saving for fuel consumption, and also time to work the soil can be made with low tillage. Another comparison of the tillage system and what it consumes in terms of energy. It started in this paper from and very recently published in 2021 or this year. Again, we have the comparison between the conventional tillage with a moldboard plow, deep conservation tillage, and shallow conservation tillage, and no tillage, direct seeding. So these 4 systems have been compared. And you can see in a way the machinery employed here. The main difference is, of course, what they call the primary tillage, either the moldboard plow, the wing sweep cultivator for deep conservation tillage, and here they use also a subsoiler to loosening the soil and then to open up the soil in the compacted layers. A shallow conservation tillage 8 to 10 centimeters, and then the precision seed in the no-till just 4 centimeters. Stubble cultivation has been done in the moldboard plow conventional and also in the reduced tillage system, but not in the no tillage system. So when we look at the full consumption of these different operations, surprising, anyway, for 2 different crops, sugar beet and soybean, we see that, let's say, the total fuel consumption was not different in sugar beet between the moldboard and the shallow conservation tillage. There was a saving of some, 12 liters. The biggest impact, of course, is you have with the no tillage system. Here they, anyway, all the other operations were kept very much the same. Maybe that's also not really 100% correct, but that's how it is in trials. The only deviation here is that for spraying herbicides in the no-till, they have added some fuel consumption, so it's a bit higher compared to the other operations. The picture in soybean looks very much the same, so significant reduction in fuel consumption only with a no-till system. If you have a subsoiler in the reduced tillage system, so it's not the difference really between plowing and non-plowing. And of course, a shallow system in this trial has contributed to a reduction of fuel consumption. Somehow a similar picture as the previous result, but the savings don't look that promising compared to the previous one. And that might be because of the local conditions. Of course, it's not only the fuel consumption. These days, we always discuss also energy efficiency. What is the energy input into the system and the energy output from the system as a crop, which of course has some energy. And of course, this depends very much on the yield growers can achieve and what the kind of energy they have invested to produce this yield. And when this is calculated in energy, in meaning gigajoules input compared to gigajoule outputs, you will come to energy use efficiency data figure. We see that in these trials, as a mean of 4 harvests in sugar beet, there was a yield increase with deep conservation tillage. Shallow was very much the same as with the plow, and also no-till was a kind of slight increase in yield. And this has contributed to a higher energy use efficiency, as you can see in this data, but the difference are not very huge. Soybean, very much the same picture. We have hardly any kind of yield differences here, but because of fuel saving and so on, the energy use efficiency has been increased. So we got more, 10 times more energy out of soybean harvest compared to what we have invested to produce this harvest. For sugar beet, it's about 25 or 24 times more energy output compared to energy input in the system. This is just the energy part. When we look at the impact on soil biology and organic matter content and the CO2 storage, also conservation agriculture has something to contribute. And this is the result of a paper comparing no-till with conventional tillage. And they have done analysis of the microbial biomass, the respiration of the microbes, the content of organic matter, and the content of organic nitrogen into the soil after 6, 20, and 35 years of no-till compared to conventional tillage. And it's quite obvious that the microbial biomass in milligrams per kilogram in the soil has increased over time. So more activity and more respiration in the soil. And this has contributed to an increase of organic carbon in this 0.2 30 centimeter layer from 11.7 in the conventional tillage up to 19.3 grams per kilogram after 35 years in the no-till system. And the same very much with the total organic nitrogen. So it's quite obvious that after a couple of years, the no-tillage soil accumulates organic matter. And in this trial, it was observed that after 20 years, 33 tons of organic carbon has been accumulated, and but this, as you can see from this graph on the right-hand side, levels off after 35 years. So there's a new equilibrium in the soil, and after that, in a way, there is no further storage of organic carbon. So what is left in the field by residues and so on is degraded at the same speed, so to say, by the microbial biomass. What has been also observed that the soil aggregates became bigger, and the stability of aggregates has been improved, and the penetration resistance has decreased significantly, which is obvious if you have more organic matter, organic carbon in the soil. The organic carbon storage in a way is good for soil fertility, as we all know. But these days also we talk a lot about climate change and CO2 emissions from crop production, and what agriculture can contribute to reduce CO2 emissions. And it's very much under discussion whether change in cultivation should get a credit on CO2 storage in the soil, at least in a way as I have shown in the previous slide for a short period of time, because it's quite obvious that this carbon storage is possible. And this table shows a lot of references for this effect. Trials done in Germany, Europe, Denmark, Austria, USA, also on a global scale. They all reveal that with no or low tillage compared to conventional tillage, a significant amount of CO2 per hectare per year can be stored in the soil. We talk about the order of magnitude of, let's say, 1 to, I would say, 4 is a bit high in this range, I think something between 1 and 2 tons of CO2 per hectare could be the credit for changing from conventional to reduced tillage. So as we know, and as I said, the abatement and CO2 storage is key to meet climate neutrality target in 2050, as it is agreed amongst the world economy, and the CO2 storage as a byproduct of low tillage crop might generate some additional income from conservation tillage in the future. This is very much under discussion in many political fora. So, in a way, next to saving some carbon for, let's say, the fuel we invest in crop production, also the storage of carbon in soil can be a good reason to consider changing from conventional to reduced tillage system. When we look at the soil water, we know that soil water is stored in the pores of the soil, and I found it very interesting to see these 2 pictures of a computed tomography of a soil 0 to 40 centimeters soil layer, and you see the dark soil, and the light colors are the pores either filled with water or air. And on the left side, we have conventional tillage soil, and on the right side, no tillage soil. So what is quite obvious in this case is that the porosity has been somehow disturbed in the plow layer zone. As we all know, by plowing, there is a risk that we compact a bit the soil in this area. Of course, it's obvious that we, in a way, destroy the connectivity of the pores in general, because we cut the soil and move the soil. So the big pores, in a way, are not continuous anymore. And also, when you look at in a way the upper soil layers, the pores seem to be less connected compared to the no tillage system. So in a no tillage, obviously, in a way, we don't find in a way the kind of plow layer where the connectivity is destroyed. Here it looks like that we have much more pores. Definitely we have more big pores, which are, let's say, important for the drainage of the soil, and also which are important to aerate the soil, so to get air into the soil profile. And air means that the microbes and so on can be more active for decomposing material. In the plowed soil, of course, we have also a lot of oxygen, and by inverting the soil, and this is the main reason why organic matter residues are degraded much faster, because they are, in a way, because the microbes get direct and immediate access to soil residues for degradation, whereas when we have no tillage, the organic matter has to penetrate gradually into the soil, and then the microbes can make microbes, earthworms, and so on can make good use of the organic matter and release nutrients and humus after degradation. So as a kind of when I look at this as a soil scientist and a grower, I would definitely prefer a soil matrix like this. I would expect that we can have a better productivity on a soil which has this continuity of pores and a good conductivity of air, water, and so on. So, but let's look at the results of different trials where they compared the conventional tillage and no tillage in terms of water storage. So when we have harvest residues on top of the soil, of course, there's a kind of insulation. So when we follow the temperature amplitude along the day, of course, we have nighttime, daytime, and the orange line shows in a way the temperature changes in a bare soil, means in a way a plowed soil, and the blue line shows you the temperature amplitude during the day over 10 days, 11, 12 days, and it's quite obvious that the residue layer above was somehow the change in soil temperature. So the amplitude with residues on top, as we know, is less compared to, in a way, a bare soil, and in particular, very high temperatures are not present on the soil surface. And we know that, of course, evaporation from the soil, in a way, it's driven by energy in the form of temperature, and it's known that in a way a high temperature soil surface in a way imposes a lot of energy for evaporation, and this was also measured in this trial, where they measured the volumetric water content in a soil layer of 0 to 12 centimeters 3 times, the 9th of September, the 11th, and the 18th of September, either under bare soil or under residues. And you can see that the volumetric water content was not significant higher initially, of course, in a kind of similar starting point. Also, after 2 days, there was a trend towards higher volumetric water content in the soil with residues, but significant already after 9 days. So we had about 8% higher volumetric water content in this soil layer, and of course depends on the texture how much water it is, but it is really significant what can be stored or in a way what can be saved against losses with having a kind of residue layer on top of the soil to avoid evaporation. So this is definitely a contributor contribution from no tillage land, and of course, reduced tillage, you still have, you incorporate some of the residues, but quite often it's more residues on top compared to, of course, a plowed land, and definitely in direct seeding no-till land, where you have more or less a complete soil cover with residues. When it comes to residues in no or low tillage, of course, it's very important to have a good management of the harvest residues, the machinery to spread the residues evenly on the soil surface, because as soon as you get kind of accumulation in some parts and let's say less residues in other parts of the field, kind of stripy pattern, then of course you can have all kind of disadvantages from no tillage as a kind of consequence of uneven residue distribution on the soil surface. So low and no tillage operations always start with a very even spread of harvest residues across the field. If this is not given, I think there's no point really in considering no or low tillage operations because it cannot really work. So this is a very important prerequisite here. When it comes to the effect of tillage on aggregate stability, organic carbon, and infiltration rate. There are different papers available that have investigated this effect. This is a result from a kind of what they call a Chernozem dark browny silty loam soil in Canada after 11 years of tillage history, meaning either zero tillage, direct seeding, now in the black bars, and conventional tillage. And after 11 years on this soil, which, you know, at least from the texture might be similar to what you have in some of the Chernozems in Ukraine, we see quite an advantage of having better aggregate stability with zero tillage compared to along different sites along a hill slope. So in always a different sites with these acronyms indicate different sites along a hill slope, because you can imagine that in a way on top of this top of the hill or on the slope or in a depression, this kind of effects are different or can be different. But in general, I see we see on all these sites along the hill slope a kind of advantage in terms of aggregate stability. I have mentioned organic carbon already, so quite significant impact on accumulation of organic carbon. And of course, when it comes to water, along a slope, it's very important that you have good infiltration so that not all the water runs off the slope. And this was also confirmed that the fall infiltration, but also spring infiltration of water after rainfall has been improved by zero tillage. So that's, of course, one reason to get more water into the soil is that you lose less by runoff and get better because of better infiltration. To what I've seen in Ukraine, most of your lands are flat. Maybe this doesn't apply too much, but in general, of course, infiltration because of the connectivity of the pores and so on can be better at high rainfall. But also there are indications in literature that in a way a plow layer can initially take more water, but of course for, let's say, longer lasting rains, the infiltration in zero tillage land or reduced tillage lands seems to be better. What we need is the water in the soil, and this has been measured in this trial. This is the soil from Poland. I have to admit it doesn't, maybe it applies to, let's say, the northwest of Ukraine to some extent. It's a kind of very light soil. You can see it's about 70% of sand. But of course, on this soil, the water storage is even more important than maybe on heavier soils. So it has 1.4% organic matter, pH for a sandy soil quite decent, 6.5, and they have measured the effect of a tillage system on the volumetric water content and the bark density of the soil, comparing conventional tillage, CT, reduced tillage, and no tillage. And this has been done in a layer of 0.5 centimeters and 10 to 20 centimeter layer. What you can see is that in the upper layer, in this case, the volumetric water content at a certain period of time has been significantly higher in both reduced tillage and no tillage. The same, it was higher in low tillage, but there was no difference in between reduced and no tillage. So, but yeah, we talk here about 2% higher volumetric water content. Here it's even 3%, or in the no tillage, it's more than 5%. And when you can calculate yourself, this kind of additional volumetric water in the soil can be quite significant for, let's say, more production when you calculate it on a hectare area. I think this adds a lot of water for productivity. So yeah, on this soil, at least, the water holding capacity has been increased, means in a way more water has been available for crop production. But this is not always found in all trials. This is another source. So the effect of tillage on plant available water. So there's a source from Germany. After 6 years, the difference in water retention was quite small compared plowed land and no tillage land. The table on the slide on the right shows the results from, let's say, more semi-arid climate in northeastern Spain. I have introduced my presentation in a way that we see increase in no tillage or low tillage in Spain in drier areas. And there a significant increase in water holding has been found with no till compared to conventional tillage. So again, following a profile of 30 centimeters, we had quite significant increases in plant available water after at a certain period in time, 11.7 compared to 7.9% in the upper layer. And then, of course, it gets even more pronounced when we go into deeper layers. So almost 6% more plant available water in a profile after the no-till operation. So after establishment, also vertical oriented structure in no-till soils contribute to increased hydraulic conductivity. And this quite often means that the water penetrates deeper, is more protected against the evaporation, and the roots can find water in the ongoing growing season in deeper layers. And because of the connectivity of pores, I think roots can easily penetrate into this lower soil layers in the profile. So, but let's summarize a bit what the reported changes in soil properties after 5 seasons of no-till could be. As we have seen, we have a couple of advantages, but there's also disadvantages. And as I said, those have to be balanced and considered based on the local conditions. As an advantage, we see increased aggregate stability, in particular near the surface. We have increased organic matter content also in the upper layer. We have increased vertical and stable pore structure, an increase in biological activities, in particular also earthworms, which have been almost not present anymore in many agricultural soils. A better infiltration rate, better hydraulic conductivity into the subsoil, and increased soil strength and load-bearing capacity with reduced damage from traffic. So in a way, soil seems to be more resistant to heavy loads because of, in a way, this aggregate stability and so on. As disadvantages, sometimes we see an increased bulk density within the previous plowed layer. Even so there's more organic matter, it doesn't mean that it always reduces the bulk density. Quite often the trend is towards a higher bulk density, which is also somehow a prerequisite for a soil which has higher trafficability. And it's not the density as such which matters. It's very much the number of pores, or the volume of pores, and the distribution of different sizes, which affects the soil productivity. It's not, the bulk density is not always given as a higher bulk density is not always given as a disadvantage. We see increased moisture content near surface, but this can delay the seeding because of the temperature, and also because maybe the soil is just too wet. So that's definitely an unwanted effect of no or low till. Reduced soil temperature, also that can in a way delay seeding for, let's say, crops which are sensitive temperature sensitive for germination. We see an increased acidity near the surface because liming can be done only on the surface. It cannot be incorporated deeply, like with a plow management. And also this applies for phosphorus or nutrients which are not very mobile in the soil, that they stick more to the surface. And then if there's a risk of water erosion, this might even contribute to loss of these nutrients by surface runoff. One reason why conservation tillage is under discussion is also that, of course, the weed, pest and disease management needs to be different. And there are some pests and diseases. For weeds, definitely, at least initially, we have a higher pressure. And for some pests and diseases, we see pros and cons, and some are in a way. Yeah, and of course, this always adds cost. And in a way, what has been observed is that in a way, in low tillage, we have some effects on spread of diseases compared to plow management. However, it depends very much on the crop rotation, to what extent this applies. So we see either the dark green treatment is very much a rotation where wheat is grown after sugar beet, and light green and gray is a rotation where wheat is grown after wheat. And we have the difference between the gray and the green is that the gray one is without any fungicide application, whereas the green ones I have the kind of standard fungicide program in wheat. So when we have, let's say, a good rotation, wheat after sugar, the difference in a way disease pressure and indicated as a response in yield between plow, low and low deep tillage and low shallow tillage are not existent. So all these perform with the same kind of yield, but if the rotation is less optimum with two wheat crops, then we will see a reduction in yield with low tillage, and of course more pronounced even with a very shallow incorporation of the straw, and of course without any fungicides. It goes even further down because the disease pressure is very, very high and cannot fully controlled by the fungicide application. So yeah, diseases depend very much on the rotation and the disease management, but in wheat we see obviously higher pressure of diseases. So when we look in general the effect of low tillage on weeds and pests and diseases, the following observations are made. In no-till, the weeds can only be controlled by non-selective herbicides, and the discussion about glyphosate and whether this will be in place in the future because of all the discussions remains to be seen. But I think no-till operations or even reduced till operations rely very heavily on this kind of herbicides. In repeated shallow incorporation can reduce the weed seeds in low till, and over time this can reduce pressure of weeds in the field. However, if we have rotations dominated by cereals, wheat grasses can increase significantly and can cause some serious problems. One reason for plowing is really also that it's a kind of somehow effective measure against weeds. So when we plow, 80 to 90% of the seeds buried are destroyed, so they cannot germinate anymore, but the residual seeds germinate after inversion in the second year, and this year after year, so there's no real chance to reduce in a way the seeds which can potentially germinate. This is different in no or low till. We of course try to trigger germination, and by this destroying in a way the wheat load, or the load of wheat seeds in the soil, and over time those in a way operating with low and no tillage observe this kind of effect that wheat pressure is going down over time. When it comes to pests and diseases, the corn borer, in a way we know, survive in the stubble and residues of corn, so low tillage can favor the corn borer. I have mentioned slugs. They feel more comfortable in low tillage areas with all the organic matter on top. Also mice in a way find more food there. It can be, of course, increase the risk of damages by mice in no-till. We see higher pressure of fusariums and DTR, this drying spot in no-till in cereals or in wheat in particular, but less pressure by the take-all disease and eye spot disease. The key message is, in a way, when comparing advantages and disadvantages of plowing, are summarized here. In a way, comparing no-till or reduced till with plowing. Plowing is appropriate losing the topsoil prior to seedbed preparation. Now it's a complete burial of weeds, residues, lime, and manure. So it exposes soil compacted to loosening, so we can break up any kind of compactation in the topsoil. It is the opportunity to mix nutrients throughout the profile. It promotes surface drainage, leading to warmer and drier seedbed in springs, so earlier planting, and it has probably a bit lower risk of crop diseases. The advantage of no-till is lack of compaction below the plow furrow, and of course high work rates and increased area capability. So the piece of land can be planted faster. We quite often observe increased bearing capacity and trafficability. This gives us more flexibility to manage the soil and in a way to get the seeds into the and planted. Definitely in hill slopes, it reduces erosion, runoff, and loss of phosphorus. In areas where we have stones in the subsoil, those are not brought to the surface, so growers don't need to collect stones continuously, and the drilling phase to take advantage of favorable weather conditions. So planting and operations can be done when we have the most appropriate conditions. And I think something which cannot be denied are that we have reduced overall cost. But the question is only whether these outweigh, in a way, maybe some penalties in yield and outweigh, in a way, weed and disease pressure. So there are also some disadvantages of plowing and no-till systems. With plowing, it cannot have sometimes the pan formation below the plowing depths, which of course impairs root penetration. The stop layer can be even too loose. We have more exposure of bare soil to wind and water erosion, and a high susceptibility to recompaction of the topsoil. So the weeds are continuously brought to the surface again. So it's not, we cannot reduce the pressure substantially. It has reduced trafficability under wet conditions, lower work rates and high costs, increased CO2 emissions, and of course the disruption of the macrofauna, earthworms, and some maybe even predatory insects. So in no-till, the disadvantage is that problems may be during very wet or very dry spells. We have definitely some challenges on the weed control. Higher cost of herbicides could be the case. Risk of nitrous oxides emissions, because nitrous oxide emissions occur when we have a lot of decomposer organic material next to the nitrogen applied. We have what the yield results and so on show that it's not suitable for poorly structured sandy soils and poorly drained soils. There is a risk of topsoil compaction, which cannot be broken up in with no-till operations, slug damage, and of course, when it comes to incorporation of manure, lime, and nutrients, this is not possible really with no-till operations. So everything stays more on the soil surface. However, in a way, when you balance the pros and cons, should it be, or why could it be considered in Ukraine? I think your crop rotation and soils are very suitable in general for low tillage systems. These are the loamy, silty loams. And of course, you have broadleaf crops like sugar beet, the maize, soybean, sunflowers. So the high work rate and area capability to take advantage of favorable weather and best timing in spring is probably one important reason to consider. Also, most of your land is plowed in fall already. So in general, maybe the more speedy warming up in spring is a kind of benefit of getting earlier into the field with the planting. Large fields require heavy machinery. I think this is probably one very important reason. Anyway, in general, low-till or no-till has better load-bearing soils, which help to avoid soil compaction by these heavy machines. And definitely increased water and carbon retention can contribute to yield increase, in particular in rain-fed systems. Quite often you have dry spells, so any additional water can help to increase yields probably. within your big holdings, you have the financial strengths over time to invest in machinery, which are required to change the machinery for low-till management. And of course, a kind of long-term strategy can bear yield reduction and additional nitrogen demand during the transition period, because quite often it's observed in the transition period where you lose some yield, but then later on in a way you gain something from, in a way, the change. So with this, I hope I gave you the pros and cons for low or no tillage system compared to conventional tillage. And of course, in a way, it's for your evaluation, what applies the most in your condition. But I would strongly recommend that maybe in some areas, this kind of soil management system should be tried, because I see probably more upsides in Ukraine for this kind of operation than downsides, and therefore it's probably good to consider adoption also in your area.